It's time to call your shot. The 2024 draft is behind us, and we now shift our focus to the next NFL season. Amir is joining the show, and we might regret these in a couple months, but we're going to be predicting who makes the playoffs in each conference, who wins the conference, and eventually who wins the Super Bowl 59. Welcome to the show, and how excited are you to get into these rankings?
I'm excited, man. This right here, I just know for a fact, when the season comes, there's going to be some major injuries, and teams are going to let us down, and teams are also going to shock us. So it's going
Yeah,
to be all
no,
over the place.
we're gonna have to do a reaction video to these at the end of the year because I'd be surprised if we got half of these right, to be honest with you, at least as far as where they're placed in the conference. But moving over to the AFC side of things, we're gonna go through the AFC, move over to the NFC, and we'll do a recap at the end. But for me, I'm on the left side, Amir's on the right. My first team to miss the playoffs, the team that's right outside, is either going to be Miami or the Buffalo Bills. And I'll give the edge to Buffalo because they have typically had the number of the Miami Dolphins. The Bills just lost too much this offseason, Amir. They lost both their starting safeties. One of those was an all pro. They lost, of course, Stephon Diggs. He found his way over there to Houston. And of course, they're now relying on Keon Coleman, a rookie wide receiver who is not the most polished wide receiver one in his own right, and then Curtis Samuel to carry this wide receiver room. I have a lot of questions. I know Josh Allen might be, Superman this year, but even if he's Superman, we've seen this defense kind of get depleted now. So he's going to have to play perfect throughout the season. I just don't know if he has enough help around him. So for that reason, I'm going to have Buffalo as the first team out. Not to mention also the division has gotten better. But Amir, who is your first team out of the AFC playoffs?
And you brought up a great point. I love Josh Allen. I love his game. He's one of my favorite players in the league. But
Oh, yeah,
the
we
one thing
know. We
I'm
know.
not going to do, the one thing I'm not going to do is let my bias get in the way. And to be honest, I mean, this team honestly sucks offensively. And so, my first team out, I put Buffalo. Me and you were kind of discussing beforehand, like, we don't know if we're disrespecting Miami or not. But, just given the fact that Buffalo has been dominating Miami the past years, I gave them the edge. But the receiving core itself isn't enough. And, you touched on, Curtis Samuel's a guy who kind of was, sitting in the shadow behind McLaurin. And so, you're basically betting all your chips to rely on him, to rely on Keon Coleman, who's a far away from even, polishing to a true NFL receiver yet. And, you pretty much lose your entire secondary. You lose Tre'Davious White, both safeties.
Mhm.
Obviously up front you get better, but it's like in reality, I mean, they lost way too much for me to go ahead and put them in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, if they are a top three, top four seed because of Josh Allen, that's not going to come to a surprise to us either because Josh Allen is Josh Allen. However, I think it's a huge year there in Buffalo. And next week, spoiler, Amir and I, we're going to be giving you guys some bold predictions going into next season. I think Buffalo can pick up one of those frustrated wide receiver, star wide receiver talents there in the NFC side of things, but we'll hold off until next week. At number seven, the team that we have barely making the playoffs. Again, shock of the video, but the Indianapolis Colts, we both have them at the number seven seed. Anthony Richardson had a great start to his season last year before some injuries got in the way. He now has a full offseason to recover, and he now is coming back to a team that is kind of loaded top to bottom. They have a complete offense. Of course, Michael Pittman had a career year. Of course, Josh Downs had a breakout rookie season. They have Alec Pierce, who's solid in his own right. And of course, they also brought in A.D. Mitchell there out of Texas, who has a lot of potential as well. Not to mention, still a great offensive line. Jonathan Taylor is in the mix, and they still have a solid defense. Amir, your thoughts about the Colts? I didn't even mention they drafted Leatu Latu, my favorite prospect in this entire draft class, let alone on the defensive side of the ball. He joins this defense to kind of be their Dwight Freeney. Your thoughts about the Colts here, Amir? Why are you so high on them, just like myself?
It does not feel right putting the Colts over a team like Buffalo, over a team Miami. But like last year, we saw, I mean, they were one missed check on the way against Houston for making the playoffs, sending Houston home. And, I'm looking at this team last year. If they can win 10 games with Gardner Minshew, it's no problem for AR, who's way more talented, who's way more upside to come in and win them games. And, I've mentioned before, I'm not high on AR, but, he's a guy who can come in, even do the bare minimum and win them games. And so I think for this Indianapolis team, the sky's the limit. Like you just mentioned, the entire offense is coming back. They decided to pay Pittman, which I thought was a great idea. The defense got even better than last year, and so I think with no problem they make the playoffs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, division has gotten a little bit weaker. Well, I guess it's gotten a little bit stronger actually with the uprising of Tennessee there. and their additions this offseason. But again, I just think this team is super complete, and I wouldn't put it past them if they end up winning this division again, because last year they seemingly had the Colts or the Texans number with Gardner Minshew as the quarterback. If they can come back this year with Shane Steichen and they can find some magic with Anthony Richardson, point blank period, I'm just really high on this Colts team this season. And number 6, let our fandom get in the way, if that's what you want to call it. But the Cleveland Browns at number 6, the number 1 defense last year. We have the reigning defensive player of the year on our defense as well. We've only gotten stronger. We're only going to get healthier on both sides of the ball. And hey, we added a promising defensive tackle that we both personally know in Michael Hall Jr. He joins this defensive front, not expecting him to do much, but again, it's a good story here, especially because we know him personally. But the Browns, not a lot of movement in the draft, not a lot of crazy pieces being added to the roster. But it all depends on number 4. And I think we both agree that if he does the bare minimum, kind of like Joe Flacco did last year, the Browns will be back and will be a double-digit team, a double-digit win team yet again.
Yeah, seeing the way Stefanski and offensively, they adjusted to getting Flacco last year. I mean, the entire offensive line was depleted. Flacco was obviously older, and they still made the offense easier on him. And so I think, even Deshaun last year, I mean, he went 5-1, by being hurt and also not playing well. And so I think this year, I mean, even if we didn't make any, major moves, I mean, we're still a loaded team that does need to get healthy. And so, we go out and get Jerry Jeudy, we go out and address our depth concerns. And so I think for no problem, we should come in, still have, an elite defense. We go ahead and add some great coaches on staff, and Dorsey, Mike Vrabel, guys like that also help lead this team, in a leadership role. And so I think with no problem, we go ahead and make the playoffs.
Yeah, no team suffered more injuries, or at least no team suffered more key injuries to their team than the Cleveland Browns. And we still managed with Joe Flacco and this carousel of revolving quarterbacks. We still made the playoffs, and we still, of course, we didn't do well in the playoffs, but we still made it with all the, I guess, injuries upon injuries that we had. And it was very impressive. But again, Kevin Stefanski proved yet again he is a, above average head coach here in the NFL, arguably a top 5 guy. At number 5, it is a division rival. Amir, if you can believe it, this was my Super Bowl pick last year, was the Cincinnati Bengals. And it was because, well, they had everybody. They didn't lose anything like they did this offseason. And hey, they had Joe Burrow. And to me, Joe Burrow, again, when he's been healthy, he has led this team to the AFC title game and to the Super Bowl. And if a couple penalties go their way in that Super Bowl, this is a team that already has a Super Bowl championship in the Joe Burrow era. This team, the only doubts I have about them this year is that the Ravens have only gotten better. The Browns have only gotten better. The Steelers as well. So very tough division. There's a lot of turmoil with this team now, Amir, with guys like Trey Hendrickson and T. Higgins, uncertain about their future with the team. Do they come in and play motivated this year, knowing that they aren't getting paid the money that they want? And they also lost some key pieces in the secondary. Amir, your thoughts about the Bengals this year? I know they got some offensive line help there with Amarius Mims, but your thoughts about this team in 2024?
At the end of the day, I think they're always going to be in the playoffs. As long as Burrow was healthy and Jamar Chase was healthy, and this team, I wanted to put them in the winning division, but we know for a fact, the team that's above them is always going to win the division. And, I'm pretty confident now that it's T. Higgins' second time requesting a trade this offseason. So, I'm pretty confident that he's gone up out of there. And you honestly brought up a great point. I was questioning even move them down a spot or two because I mean, every team in our division got even better, and Cincy didn't do much to really get better offensively.
Right.
And so I think since T. Higgins is gone, since Henderson is probably going to be gone, I think this team is perfectly set at 5.
And I'm going into this season with the assumption that those guys are going to be there. Their production might just dip a little bit, or who knows? In contract years, some guys that have their best years of their career because they're trying to chase that big dollar amount on that contract. And of course, the coming off season. So maybe T. Higgins has a great year. Maybe he, has a production drop off, or who knows? Like you said, maybe he's traded before day 1 of the NFL season. But for the fact that Joe Burrow's coming back, they still have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, maybe the best connection in the NFL. And for that reason, and for my love for Joe Burrow, they're at number 5. But again, these wild card teams can all be flipped depending on where you think they can finish. At number 4 for me, I have the Houston Texans. And you ask me, Owen, how? They added Stephon Diggs. They added Danielle Hunter. Of course, they've only gotten better throughout the draft. Last year, they were an 11 plus win football team, and they made it to the second round of the playoffs with a rookie quarterback. How is this team not higher on this list? Well, it's the fact that they have a second year quarterback. The fact that rookie quarterbacks don't ever play that well, Amir, and it's kind of hard to imagine that this team in year two, CJ Stroud can only go higher. He can only continue to progress at that level. And I just don't think that CJ Stroud, now that teams have film on him, they know what he likes, what he doesn't like, what bothers him. It's hard for me to imagine that even though this team has only gotten better, that the production that this team's record is only going to skyrocket. Their division's also gotten a little bit better, of course, with the Colts, and of course Tennessee has only gotten better this offseason. I'm worried that this team, I'll say this. I think that this team can be a better football team. Their record just may not reflect that, if it makes any sense. I think they might be an 11-win football team yet again, but they're going to be a scarier team again, if that makes any sense. But again, as of right now, I do like three teams better than them in the AFC, as crazy as that might sound. But again, they're a better team, but same record. Your thoughts here, or who's at your number 4 spot?
So my fourth spot, I actually have the Jets, and you brought a great point, with CJ Stroud, and that's my biggest concern for that team. And but I'm looking at the Jets team, and obviously we've been talking about it every episode. We're not really worried about Rodgers and his injury because he doesn't rely on mobility anyway. But I mean, this team is honestly loaded on both sides of the ball. It just comes to those top three teams either having a player or two to kind of put them over the edge above this team. I think the Jets are going to be legitimate contenders. I think they're going to win a division with no problem. We're probably going to sweep Miami. Possibly sweep or split with Buffalo. Sweep New England. I think this team is going to really be a scary team come playoffs. And, we see every year, these elite defenses, these elite pass defenses shine. And this team has only gotten better, only did a great job of protecting Aaron Rodgers up front, adding some receivers, in the receiving core. And I think this team is going to be really scary come playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. I will hold off my thoughts about the Jets until a little bit later. But at number 3 for me, it is the Baltimore Ravens. Amir, can you imagine a read option between Lamar Jackson and his, his athletic ability, and then just the powerhouse of Derrick Henry? I don't know how last year the Browns, we struggled, and other teams in the league, they struggled to stop Gus Edwards. Can you imagine stopping Derrick Henry in this offense? Hey, look, all I'm going to say is Derrick Henry's going to probably have at least 12 to 15 rushing touchdowns this year. And again, this team, Zay Flowers is going to be back for next year. Mark Andrews is coming back. This team has only gotten better offensively and defensively, re-signing, of course, Justin Madubuike, a breakout star defensive lineman from last year. And of course, they added some pieces throughout the draft to help out the secondary. Your thoughts here about the Baltimore Ravens, or at least just jump into your number 3 team, but as long as they have the reigning MVP in Lamar Jackson, this team is going to be a top 3 seed in the AFC, in my opinion.
Yeah, and my 3 team, I have the Houston Texans and I keep bringing this up. My biggest concern is for Stroud as well, but I think even if Stroud production wise goes down, this team is only going to go up. I mean, like last year, the whole entire season, they suffer from some major deficiencies defensively, but they go ahead and make their secondary better, get better up front defensively. Their linebacker core is going to be even healthier this year. And so I think, this team has no problem making a top 3 seed and absolutely being a true contender come playoffs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, it all depends on CJ Stroud. If he continues to, I guess, develop at the rate that he was at, and not only is he probably going to lead this team to the number 1 seed, but if he continues at this rate, he's going to have an argument to be the best quarterback in the class. That's how spectacular his rookie year was. Or I guess best quarterback in the league is what I was getting at there. Because again, his rookie season was that amazing. If he progresses at that rate, nobody's going to stop him, even Patrick Mahomes. At number 2, I do have the New York Jets. And like you touched on there, they are probably, outside of maybe the Niners and the Lions, the most complete team in football as far as top to bottom. They do have a 39-year-old quarterback coming back from injury. But again, when has Rodgers ever relied on his athleticism to be a Hall of Fame first ballot level Super Bowl winning quarterback? It's not ever been his game. But we do know Rodgers is one of the smartest, and of course, one of the most accurate quarterbacks we've ever seen. I think if he comes back to an offense now, having more chemistry with guys like Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, and now Mike Williams is coming into the fold, this is an offense that also added protection up front. This is an offense that I think is going to be elite this year. And I think, like you mentioned, I think they're going to win this division with ease. And of course, we know the defense is there. My only worry about this team, Amir, as far as competing for a Super Bowl, is Robert Saleh. For the fact that he's made it to the Super Bowl before with San Francisco, but as a defensive coordinator, he's not the head honcho. He's not calling the shots. But now that he's the head coach, he hasn't proven much here in New York. Again, he's had a lot of Zach Wilson problems and of roster injury problems. But I'm excited to see where this team can go. But it all depends on Robert Saleh. Is he a good enough coach to get this team over the top? That's my biggest question for the Jets.
And you brought a great point. For him, I mean, shoot, we honestly even saw it in the Super Bowl alone. Even when he did make it, I mean, he had a huge collapse in that second half. So,
He
that's
did.
definitely
He did.
a huge concern. And and going into my number 2 team, I'm going to the Baltimore Ravens. And me and you kind of talked about this in the past constantly. Baltimore is a team that's never going to go away. And I'm honestly shocked to see every single offseason, casual fans and media like to go ahead and write this team off. And us as Browns fans in this division, seeing how great they are in the regular season, we're not surprised when this team comes out and win 12 games, 13 games. And,
That's just who they
casual fans
are.
are surprised. And this team will not go away as long as they have Harbaugh and great defensive pieces. And and a guy like Lamar Jackson, who's been the face of this team. If he's still on the team, this team is going to be a legit contender. So I have them as that second seed.
Yeah, and again, we saw the new offensive coordinator last year. Of course, this offense looked different and they looked more aggressive offensively. Of course, when some injuries happened to some of their receiving options, it kind of reverted back to what we knew. But again, in the playoffs, this team made it to the AFC title game for a reason. Now they need to shore up some things, but some of their biggest weaknesses, Amir, like that secondary, for example, they addressed that here in the NFL draft in free
Yeah.
agency. And this team has only gotten better, if you can believe it, especially bringing in the King, Derrick Henry. As a Browns fan, I don't look forward to playing Derrick Henry. But at number 1, we're both gonna agree that the Pittsburgh Steelers. Oh, I'm just joking. The Kansas City Chiefs. Come on, you guys knew this. There's no surprise here. The back-to-back Super Bowl champions. You have the best player and the best coach on the planet, arguably the best tight end as well, in the trio of Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, and Travis Kelce. Now, there's questions because you did have to trade away L'Jarius Sneed. So does the secondary, are they going to be able to bounce back here in 2024? That's going to be their biggest question here. Can Trent McDuffie be that alpha boundary number 1 corner? So that's going to be the biggest question for me for Kansas City. But again, up front, they re-signed Chris Jones. Of course, offensively, you trade for Marquise Brown, and then you draft the fastest man alive in football, in the football world, in Xavier Worthy. You have now 2 Tyreek Hill level speed receivers on the outside to stretch this defense or any defense and that's something you didn't have last year, Amir. Of course, you had McCole Hardman, but he's not the threat that Xavier Worthy will be, or the threat that Marquise Brown is,
Yes.
even though he can't catch the football. You have 2 field stretchers now, so Rashee Rice, when he comes back, and Travis Kelce, they're going to have all this room underneath to work, and I can't imagine the defense can stop this Kansas City Chiefs team on the road to being one of the first ever three-peat Super Bowl champions in NFL history. But your thoughts about the Chiefs here, Amir? Can they do it? Can they be a three-peat Super Bowl champion? Or if you want to hold off till later, we can do that as well.
Yeah, let's go ahead and hold off. But I'm gonna talk about KC. This team, man, like I just mentioned, this is gonna be scary. And and I think this year when we watch this team, it's gonna bring us back to when they had Tyreek Hill. A lot of motions, a lot of working over top, stretching defenses out, and having Kelsey underneath just feasting. And the only reason why this team wasn't the 1 seed this past year was for the simple fact that the O line was terrible, and they dealt with major injuries, and also them lacking a receiving core. Well, now it's like, I mean, this team doesn't really have any deficiencies. You can still make the argument, for the tackles, but at the end of the day, I mean, they won it all with terrible tackles last year. And so, you have Rashee Rice who had a breakout rookie year. He's going to be even better. And then you have Xavier Worthy, Marquise Brown. Man, this team is going to be scary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll hold off until later, but here's a quick recap. Again, if I'm on the left side, Amir's on the right. The only differences we had were we had the Jets, Baltimore, and Houston all shuffled around in the 2 to 4 seeds. Of course, we all have them winning the division. But Kansas City at number 1, we have those teams shuffled 2 through 4, and 5 through 7 goes as follows with the Bengals and Joe Burrow's resurgence, the Browns here with the new offensive coordinator, and the Colts round out our AFC. Of course, we also try to keep that that mindset that about 6 new teams total make the playoffs each and every year compared to the year prior. So again, I think to me, I have what three teams in the AFC alone. So we'll take a look at the NFC side of things here in a moment. My first team out in the NFC, and if I had to bank on this, if I had to bet on this, I won it. Is a good way to put it. But my first team out in the NFC is the Minnesota Vikings, and why? Right? They have Sam Darnold as their starting quarterback, and if he's not good, they have a rookie JJ McCarthy, which a lot of people weren't high on. Again, this is where the NFL gets weird, right? This is a team that still does have one of the most talented offensive grouping of receiving options. When you have guys like Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, all guys that are dynamic with the ball in their hands, and then you bring in a guy like Aaron Jones, you still have a great offensive line. Of course, Ty Chandler had a breakout year as well. There's a lot of defensive questions with this team, Amir, and of course, quarterback questions. But I think whether if it's Sam Darnold or, of course, JJ McCarthy, they just have to do the bare minimum. They just got to get their playmakers the ball in space. And this team, even with this subpar quarterback room, they might put up 25 to 30 points a game because of the fact that they have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, and these talented running backs here. So I'm going to throw out a flyer pick here with a team like the Minnesota Vikings. But again, there's a lot of different arguments. You can have the Saints, Buccaneers, Bears, a plethora of different teams. I'm going to go with a flyer and a bit of a home run ball here with the Minnesota Vikings. But your first team out in the NFC is?
So, this is going to catch a lot of people by surprise. My first team out is the Green Bay Packers. And, this team got better defensively. They bring in Josh Jacobs, but the biggest concern is still, they still haven't grabbed the receiver yet. And obviously, the offseason is still going. But, the top two teams, in the division, I think are going to be the top two teams. They've only gotten better. And so, the only reason why I have them out is because the team that I put above them has gotten even better, times 10, And so I think this team, is going to be good. But, the offensive line is still not where it needs to be. You go and lose Bakhtiari. And, last year you dealt with a bunch of injuries. And this year, your O-line has only gotten even worse. And, I think this team is going to struggle. The offensive line, honestly, it's still going to be struggling this year, in my opinion. And so, even if you want to rely on Jordan Love, it's going to be tough for him to put together a complete season of what he did last year.
Yeah, Green Bay, here's my argument for them. Of course, they're at my number 7 seed. I think they do sneak back into the playoffs. They're going to be a better team, but again, seeding wise, they're going to be the same seed as last year. Addressing the offensive line, which you mentioned there, we talked about it a lot. This team had the most offensive line combinations last year, and their quarterback still had a breakout second half of the year. And of course, Jordan Love has been my favorite quarterback, one of my favorite quarterbacks in the league since he was really drafted at Utah State. But addressing the offensive line, they drafted 3 of them in this draft cycle. So maybe one of those guys can, come out and be something, but they still have a veteran like Elton Jenkins on the offensive line. Maybe he can help develop these offensive lineman prospects. But Green Bay, is up there with Dallas and they're up there with New Orleans as far as developing offensive linemen. They just need one or two of these guys to hit, but especially a guy like Jordan Morgan, who I felt like they reached on in the first round. He was their first pick. Maybe he's better than what I thought and what most scouts saw. Maybe Jordan Morgan can be their next David Bakhtiari. But again, there's a lot of developmental questions with this offensive line. Can they develop these guys? That's the biggest question for their offensive line. But like you touched on, their defense got better, especially bringing in a guy like Xavier McKinney out of New York. But also offensively, you touched on it there with the receivers, and that is my biggest question around Jordan Love. Who is the go-to option? Is it Romeo Dubs? Is it, is it, I can't even think about the names right now. Is it, Jaden Reed? Is it Christian Watson? I think right now they have a 2A, 2B, 2C situation there in that receiver room. And then the tight ends as well. They just have a 2A, 2B situation with Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. They don't have a go-to option. They just have a bunch of secondary guys, if that makes sense. But because I love Jordan Love and because I think this team did get better and they have a great coach, I'll give the edge to Green Bay. But after all of that yapping, let's talk about another NFC North team here. Who's that number 7 for you?
So my 7, I got the Chicago Bears, and I can't believe I'm doing this, but seeing the way this team, seeing the way this team played the second half of the season last year, seeing how the defense elevated, and then seeing them go ahead and make the defense even better. And I love Justin Fields, but you're bringing Caleb Williams, who I think is a more talented quarterback throwing the ball wise. And you go ahead and you load up the receiving core even more. You bring in, Keenan Allen, you go ahead and absolutely load this offense up. I think, I'm expecting Caleb to have a CJ Stroud type rookie year. As crazy as
Wow.
that sounds, I'm expecting him to come in, prove himself, throw for 3,500 yards, 30 touchdowns without a problem.
No, I mean, that is definitely a bold prediction. And I don't know if I mentioned that, but we're going to be doing that next week here on the show. So if that interests you, of course, join the show, subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notifications because next week we're going to have some bold predictions. But CJ Stroud, those rookie seasons, or the season that CJ Stroud had, is definitely an anomaly, no pun intended, because quarterbacks aren't supposed to play like that, Amir, in their rookie
Nope.
year. But if that's the new norm, if these new quarterback prospects are only getting better and they can have that impact from day one, the Bears are going to be scary. Is a great way to put it. Especially again, Roma Dunze's there as well now. That if that offense needed more weapons, they now have it. At number 6, I have the LA Rams, and again, they have your favorite receiver in the league, but also Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp's coming back, and he's said on multiple occasions he's on this revenge tour. He's going to come back, and he wants to be
That's
that
scary.
triple crown wide receiver yet again. So they have one of the best receiving duos in the league. They have Matt Stafford, who still wants to have one more run left in his career. They have, to me, the best coach in the NFL, at least my favorite coach in Sean McVay. Again, defensively, they got better. Offensively, they still have the same group. And they also brought in Blake Corum, which is an interesting pickup, adds to this running back room. But your thoughts here, or I guess your number 16 here, we'll talk about the Rams here in a moment.
So for my number 6, I got the Dallas Cowboys, and honestly, I hate putting the Cowboys high, but at the end of the day, I mean, they're a team kind of like Baltimore that won't go away no matter what. And I think this team. Now, I think this is their last shot to really do something. I don't think they're going to do much, but I think they're going to do something. Obviously finish with maybe 11, 12 wins, make the playoffs, sneak their way in, and this team is probably going to get bounced in the first round once again.
Yeah.
But I mean, but from on paper, this team is still too low to not leave them out the playoffs, which is why I have them at 6.
Yeah. At number 5 for me is Dallas. 5 for you is the Rams for a lot of the same points that we just touched on. But again, I want to get your thoughts here about the Rams. What is your outlook on them going into next year? Why do you give them a little bit of an edge over a team like Dallas and I guess even a Caleb Williams-led Bears team?
So, for this Rams team, last year, me and you were kind of talking about how, this team is probably going to be, the scariest team that's kind of overlooked. And, I think coming into this year,
We had
like you
them
just
going to the
mentioned,
NFC Championship game.
exactly. And so, you kind of mentioned it, coming into, this year, Cooper Kupp's obviously going to be probably more so healthy than he was last year. He's on his revenge tour. And so, I'm kind of looking at this team offensively, and I'm like, Kyron's going to be back for, technically his year 2. Puka's going to be back for year 2, which is going to be scary. The offensive line got better. Stafford's going to finally be healthy. And as long as you have McVay offensively, the offense is going to be straight. And, I go ahead and look at the defense. You lose Aaron Donald, but, I mean, you go and bring in some pieces that nobody's talking about. I mean, you bring in Tre'Davious White. You go and draft Jared Verse. You're going to bring in Darius Williams, who I think is a super underrated corner. And so I think for this team is going to be an absolutely scary team. And the only reason why I don't have them winning the division is because the team above them already proved themselves.
Yeah, the Seminoles had 2 great prospects coming into the draft. Trey Benson, I was really high on at the running back position. But Jared Verse, I mean, Jared Verse is just he's just a disruptor. If you haven't seen his highlight tape, I know highlight tapes don't tell everything, but go watch it. I mean, this dude is just he's just a bully. Is a great way to I guess express to Rams fans what you're getting out of an edge rusher like Jared Verse. But at number 5 for me was Dallas, like you mentioned there. They're just a team that is always going to be good. And I'll say this, it's their last dance. Shout out to Michael Jordan, but it's their last dance is what we keep hearing repeatedly over and over again from Jerry Jones, of course, the owner of this team. This team was in salary cap, HE double hockey sticks, right? They had no wiggle room this offseason. And, I guess, hey, Amir, this team is going to come back looking the same exact as they did last year, but they made a huge addition, Amir. Ezekiel Elliott is back for the Dallas Cowboys. He's going to look to turn back the clock, but he's also had 8 straight seasons in his career of his production going down year after year. And Zeke's not going to be the thing, but again, this team is going to be solid. They have the roster, but can they get over the hump? That's always the biggest question. The last thing we wanted to note here about the Rams, of course, we had to reset there a little bit, was that, this team, again, we mentioned their defensive additions, some of their offensive additions, and Blake Corum. But other guys, I want to throw it out there. I've made videos on the channel. A guy like Cameron Kinchins out of Miami, a ball hawk kind of safety. He went under the radar in the NFL draft, and to me was a steal at pick 99 for the LA Rams. He's going to help out this secondary. Again, a much needed void on this defense gets filled with my favorite safety prospect in Cameron Kinchins. But Amir, you also wanted to mention that, hey, we forgot another defensive lineman addition that they had next to Jared Verse. Hey, I mean, they were college teammates.
Yeah. I mean, shoot, Braden Fisk, a guy that had a breakout combine, he ran a 4.7. Adding that athletic ability, you can run so many different stunts and so many different things with that defensive line.
Again, there's no replacing Aaron Donald for the Rams, but I think they did a pretty good job here helping out, or I guess just, it's an overall unit improving this defense. Of course, trying to fill the void of a Hall of Famer in Aaron Donald. But at number 4, I'm just going to get right into it because we both have the same team in the Atlanta Falcons. They brought in Kirk Cousins, and after that, it was okay. They got their quarterback, they took their shot, but they're now one of the most interesting offseason teams, Amir, because they went out there with the 8th overall pick without addressing their quarterback beforehand, and they ended up drafting his replacement in Michael Penix Jr. at number 8. Not only is Michael Penix an older quarterback, he's already 24 here in a week or so, but now he's going to have to sit behind a quarterback that they just paid $180 million to. So instead of helping your quarterback and your team for this year, you drafted his replacement, and that's why Atlanta has now become one of the most talked about teams this entire offseason. But when we put that aside, whether if it's Michael Penix or Kirk Cousins, given their division, Amir, I have the same, prediction for this team. I think they win the division. I think we see untapped potential from guys like Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts finally getting to that next level. And of course, Drake London has potential to break out as well, kind of like how, guys like our previous receivers have with Kirk Cousins in the past. I'm excited for this team offensively, especially now that Arthur Smith is gone. He was the worst head coach in the league, and now he's gone. I'm excited for this offense and these weapons, especially the defense got better as well. New head coach, your thoughts here about the Atlanta Falcons, Amir? Can they, is this their ceiling, or can they kind of be sneaky contenders?
No, I think that's their ceiling, winning the division. And, my biggest concern is, I mean, they still don't have a true number one receiver just yet, but I mean, aside from that, aside from them probably, doing the worst, draft pick in NFL history,
Oh,
this
wow,
team,
that's crazy.
this team is honestly good on both sides of the ball. And, last year we were talking about it, if they can get somewhat of a above average quarterback, I mean, this is a scary football team. And I mean, this team, what 9 games last year?
Yeah.
With
Arthur
Desmond
Smith as
Ritter,
the head coach.
exactly, with Arthur Smith and Desmond Ritter, playing. And so, I think you go ahead and add Kirk Cousins, a guy who still has shown flashes of him being a really good quarterback in this league. This team should have no problem elevating Kyle Pitts, elevating Bijan Robertson, elevating a guy like Darnell Mooney.
Yeah,
And so I
Darnold.
think this team is like, I think this team with no problem wins the division and end up getting that 4th seed.
Yeah, no, as a Gators fan, again, Kyle Pitt's one of the greatest players I've ever seen at the collegiate level. I just hope that this dude can finally get the football here in 2024
Yeah.
because, again, he has been doing a whole bunch of nothing but cardio here in his first couple years in the NFL. But again, at number 4, the Atlanta Falcons. And I want to throw it out there for my sake and my name. I don't think Michael Penix was a bad pick. I just think that they took him a little bit too early. But
Oh yeah.
at number 3, I have the San Francisco 49ers. It might be a shock. It probably is a shock, but I just think for the fact that I think number 1 and number 2 are, they're on the same level as far as how complete their roster is. And again, I think San Fran, there's not really much I can say they are the most complete roster in football. I'll say that. Again, this is a team that went to the Super Bowl last year. And if, hey, if some injuries didn't happen during the game of the Super Bowl, maybe some things go their way. Maybe if some of their players knew the overtime rules, maybe San Francisco is here as your Super Bowl champions in 2023. This team is super talented, top to bottom. I just think that number 1, 2, and 3, you can have in any really order that you would like. I'm just going to have San Fran at 3 because of personal preference. But as far as a talent perspective, they're probably number 1 in the entire league. But your thoughts here, or I guess your number 3 team here in the NFC side of things?
I think this team, first of all, I want to start by saying I think these top 3 seeds are all interchangeable. You know what I
Yes,
mean? And so
very.
and so and so I think for my number 3 team, I'm going with the Eagles. And I think just based off of last season, kind of seeing them collapse, seeing them fall apart. I don't want to jump the gun and put them at 1 or 2. But I'm gonna be not gonna be mad if you end up changing them to 1 or 2. And I think this team has only gotten better. And the casual fans gonna look from the outside and say, oh, Jalen Hurts, the offense, fell apart. They ended up losing what, like 7 straight games at the end of the year.
Yeah,
And so
basically.
pretty much. And so this team. You go ahead and bring in Saquon. You go ahead and load up your good secondary. Drafting Cooper DeJean, Kenyon Mitchell. You still have some young upside in that DB room, which is your biggest problem last year. The offensive line is still great. The D line is probably their strongest point. And so, even if Jalen Hurts, depletes production wise, this team is still going to be great. Still going to easily win the division and being true contenders.
Yeah, to me, they're at number 2 because I know recency bias it has such a strong hold on the general media and just the general fan perception of teams going into the next year. I just want to take a trip down memory lane. This is a team that 2 years ago dominated people. They were a 14-win football team. They ran through the NFC to get to the Super Bowl. And again, they fell short to arguably the greatest talent that we've ever seen in Patrick Mahomes. So, okay, whatever. Going into last year, this team was 11-0 to start the year. Now, again, they ran through a crazy murderer's row of teams like Buffalo, Dallas, San Fran, and in a span of like 6 to 7 weeks, they had some injuries. They got banged up. They lost their confidence. And going into the playoffs, ultimately, they lost in the first round. So, sure, they did lose 7 of their last 8 games. But like you mentioned, they brought in Saquon. This team overall has only gotten better, even though they lost Jason Kelsey. They paid their wide receivers. This is a prove-it year, and this is a bounce-back year. I think Philly will come back with a chip on their shoulder, and I think they're going to, be back on top of the mountain here in 2024. But we'll talk about that here in just a few moments. But who's your number 2 team here before we get into number 1?
So at my number 2, I have the 49ers. And
I'm
this
happy. I'm
team.
happy we have the same number 1 team.
Yeah. This team, defensively, in my opinion, got better. You obviously still have Greenlaw, Fred Warner. The D line is still going to be the D line. You lose Chase Young, which that doesn't really mean much. But secondary wise, they got even better. You still got the Diamador Lenore, Travarius Ward. You go ahead and bring in a guy who I think is completely underrated, Malik Mustafa out of Wake Forest. And so, offensively, you go ahead and you drafted the greatest, Gator prospect in NFL history, Ricky Pearsall. And so, I think this
Pearsall,
team,
man, Ricky.
and so, this 49ers team with no problem, it's still going to be elite, still going to be great. And, I'm also betting on the chips for Brock Purdy to get even better.
Yeah.
And, last year, they really dealt with some major injuries too, and Debo, Christian McCaffrey played hurt, George Kittle played hurt as well. And so, I believe that this team, as long as they got Shanahan, as long as they keep on doing what they're doing, they're going to be a top 3 team every year.
Yeah, man, Slick Rick. I'm super excited for him. Again, I expected him to be a day 2 pick. And there was questions whether if he falls to even the 3rd round. San Fran got their guy in the slot. And of course, I'm excited to see what he can do there. But interestingly enough, what does that mean for Brandon Ayuk and Debo Samuel? Who knows? Maybe one of them get traded before the season starts.
And also too, many people kind of had questions for Pearsall going that high, but personally, I think he matches perfect with Brock Purdy's play style. He's a guy who loves, in my opinion, he's a guy who plays in the slot, who loves attacking the middle of the field, which is where a guy like Purdy loves throwing the football. And so I think Shanahan's going to have no problem developing a guy like that.
Yeah, he's another one of those my guys for me. I think he's going to be on the level of a Wes Welker, Julian Edelman kind of receiver. He's just that polished of a receiver. Just it's hard to imagine he doesn't succeed because he does everything so well. But at number 1, shout out to Detroit. I don't know the last time they were able to say this. I don't know if they've ever been able to say this. Maybe back in the days with Barry Sanders and the crew. But the Detroit Lions, for both of us, are going to be the number 1 seed in the NFC. This is one of, if not the most complete roster in football. And again, they had a crazy draft. They drafted arguably the best cornerback prospect in the class in Terrion Arnold, and then they also get Ennis Rackstraw down the board. So they addressed the secondary, and offensively, they also added some pieces as well. This is a team that still has the best offensive line in football. Jared Goff is not the caliber of quarterback as maybe the Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allens of the world, but if he just does his job and protects the football, this is a team that is going to rely on the run, and they're going to make very few mistakes Guys like Jameer Gibbs should have a great year. Montgomery is going to have a great year. Amon-Ra is going to be Amon-Ra. And Sam Laporta had a breakout year as well. It's hard to imagine that this team doesn't get back to where they were last year. And who knows, last year, if they didn't rely on their analytics team as much, and maybe they just use their football minds to kick a field goal every once in a while, they would have went to the Super Bowl. But your thoughts about the Detroit Lions and them being at the #1 spot?
This team, obviously has the best O-line in football, the best running back duo, a top five receiver, arguably a top three tight end. And you go ahead and look on the defensive side, a top of the top 10 edge rusher. Then you go and bring in DJ Reader. You go in the draft and instead you go in the draft and you address all your secondary issues, which was your biggest problem last year. Man, this team, in my opinion, if they're not, a top 2 seed, they underperformed. And, this team is absolutely loaded on both sides of the ball. You have a great coach, and we kind of saw last year after the game. They kind of looked defeated, saying it's going to be harder, this upcoming year. But for them, it honestly got easier. I think this team, in my opinion, is probably the most loaded team on both sides of the ball in football.
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of teams have the arguments, but the Detroit definitely has maybe the best one in the NFL. And again, they are on the top of our NFC rankings here going into 2024. But here's a quick recap. We both have Detroit at #1, Philly and San Fran flip-flopped at 2 and 3, Atlanta at #4, Dallas and the Rams are flip-flopped at 5 and 6, and you have Chicago with Caleb Williams. That's probably the shock of the video, getting into the playoffs, and I have Green Bay at 7. So the only differences as far as what teams we had making the playoffs, Amir, were Green Bay and Chicago. Good, go figure. One of the most historic and decorated rivalries in professional sports, let alone just the NFL. But here we get into our NFC and AFC champions. Amir, I kind of spoiled it here, but why do you have Detroit at #1? Why do you have them winning your NFC here in 2024?
So, I have Detroit, for the simple fact that, like you just mentioned, last year, they were absolutely, putting their paws on the 49ers and, absolutely, dominating them that first half. And, realistically, if they're going to go on a run, realistically, they're not going to go ahead and play San Fran and Philly. They'll probably end up playing, too much Chicago, sliding by or, getting that first round by, end up only having to play a team like Philly or San Fran in the NFC Championship and have, a great chance at getting to the Super Bowl. And so I think, this team, I believe they're going to dominate the regular season, get that 1 seed, really only have one true team that's going to really, have a good chance at stopping them in the NFC Championship. And I think their path to the Super Bowl is looking great.
Yeah, no, again, not only would this be history for them as far as winning their conference, but also making the Super Bowl, which I guess they go hand in hand. But Detroit, I'm hoping as a Browns fan, as a fan of a team that hasn't had much postseason success in my lifetime, Detroit can say the same. So I'm hoping that they can make some noise this upcoming year. But Amir, who's your AFC champion to face Detroit here in the Super Bowl?
So my AFC champion, no surprise, I'm taking the Kansas City Chiefs. And I really hate picking the same team, but sometimes it's kind of like you just have to.
Yeah.
You have to. And this team showed last year, as long as they have Mahomes and Andy Reid, this team will always be arguably the best team in the league. It doesn't matter how the roster is looking. And, seeing how bad the roster was, and how well they played in the playoffs, how well the defense and offense played, coming into this year, Mahomes and Andy Reid are probably chilling like, hey, listen, the roster only got better. Our jobs are only going to get easier. Like it's no way, our run is going to get harder than it was last year.
So I had the privilege, Amir, of course, putting these slides together and seeing your answers before the show. So I had the privilege of seeing exactly who your Super Bowl matchup was going to be. Coincidentally, not only did we have a lot of the same AFC and NFC playoff teams, we also had the same Super Bowl matchup. So on record here, the Chiefs and the Lions would be my pick to go to Super Bowl 59. However, for the sake of the video and for the sake of having just a different outlook on what could happen in 2024, I gave you my secondary AFC and NFC pick here. So in the NFC, I have the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, for a lot of the reasons that I mentioned, they've only gotten better, even though they've lost a first ballot Hall of Famer in Jason Kelce. This team is out for blood, and they're going to have a chip on their shoulder. I'm excited to see what Philly can do in a prove-it year there in Philadelphia. But in the AFC side of things, I do have the New York Jets. Maybe I just like the color green, but Again, they have one of the most complete rosters in the NFL. Aaron Rodgers, a down year for him is throwing six interceptions. That's a down year for Aaron Rodgers. This is a dude that's going to come back. He's going to give you 4,000 yards, 30 plus touchdowns, and less than 5 interceptions. And if this team can protect the ball, like I know Aaron Rodgers can, this defense alone is going to carry them the way to the AFC Championship game. Now, if they get over Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, that's a different story. I want to see how Robert Saleh can be in those big moments. But as far as the regular season and the beginning of the postseason, I think they have what it takes to at least make the AFC Championship game. And in this scenario, they are my secondary pick to make the Super Bowl. So in my secondary scenario, it's the Jets versus the Eagles. You have the Chiefs and the Detroit Lions. Amir, are you going to be able to set some history here? Well, I guess you are either way. Either the first three-peat or the Lions finally get on top of the mountain. Who is your winner of Super Bowl 59 as far as May 1st here in 2024?
So in my opinion, me and you were kind of talking about this, last year. If Mahomes would have won last year, we got to have a serious conversation about him, being in that GOAT conversation. And I think if there was to be any time a dynasty was a three-peat, it will be now. And so, I'm leaning towards Kansas City, the three-peat, for the first time in NFL history. And, obviously, no other team has done it, but everything is perfectly in line for KC to do it. I mean, last year, they go ahead and win it with the depleted roster. And so, you have Mahomes, who I think eventually is going to be the greatest quarterback ever. And so, you go ahead and make the roster even better. Their division got even worse. And so I think they'll have no problem winning that one seed, being well rested for the playoffs, getting to the playoffs and honestly, pretty much running through the AFC. And so I think they're going to three-peat for the first time in NFL history.
Yeah, no, again, it's I hate to pick chalk, and of course we share that same mindset, but setting history either way, it's a heart and mind difference here because my heart wants the Detroit Lions to make some history, to win their first ever franchise Super Bowl, but my mind and my gut tell me, the Kansas City Chiefs, saying that Patrick Mahomes knows he's in a position to do something that Tom Brady never did, and that's going to only help him, in his case, to be the GOAT at the end of his career. To get a three-peat is something that we probably won't ever witness again. So if the Chiefs can get there, I can't imagine they lose. So I'm going to have the Chiefs probably winning a three-peat there in that matchup. But in my secondary matchup, I'm going to take the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that 2 years ago got there, but they couldn't get over the hump. So this year, of course, they have a better coach than the New York Jets. So in this scenario, I'm going to trust the running attack of the Philadelphia Eagles to control the clock, to win the game. And even though Aaron Rodgers is less likely to make a mistake than this Philadelphia offense, Philadelphia is just too loaded offensively. And of course, they have the depth like the Jets probably don't have. So if they do get to this point, saying that injuries are bound to happen, I trust Philadelphia's depth over a team like the New York Jets. But there it is, episode 170 in the books, NFL playoff predictions, post-NFL draft. Some quick announcements here before we get out of the show. Of course, starting next week, again, May 6th, be on the lookout. Starting next week until probably the end of the football season, we're going to be releasing 4 podcasts a week. One on Monday, where again, on Mondays and Wednesdays, it'll be fantasy football based. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, it'll be our normal NBA and NFL podcast. So basically, from Monday through Thursday, for the next, until the Super Bowl is over, we're going to have 4 podcasts a week here on the channel. So be on the lookout. Very excited. Fantasy season is actually upon us now that the draft is over. But Amir, any final thoughts before we get out of here? And of course, next week we have a very fun show planned here for the show.
I'm excited for next week, man. And seeing more and more, prospects arise, after the draft, and that made me even more excited for this year. And I've mentioned this before, this might be one of the most, if not the most entertaining football year we've ever seen. And so I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm just hoping this year we get a lot more health compared to last year. A lot of the big names were injured, especially at the quarterback position. Let's just get some health here, going into 2024. But again, very fun show planned next week as we're going to be doing some bold predictions. So be on the lookout. But until then, stay happy, stay healthy, get out of here.